The gate agent called for boarding in Zone 2, and Marcus felt that familiar tightness in his chest, the one that came before the hardest moments. He held his breath and took a mental inventory. 3 children, 3 tickets, 3 car seats, 2 carry-on bags, 1 diaper backpack, and absolutely zero buffer for anything going wrong. Emma reached for his right hand. Liam grabbed his left. Noah clung to his leg. They looked up at him with eyes full of trust, and he felt that weight settle across his shoulders like it always did. Not heavy in a bad way, but heavy in the way that reminded him he was responsible for everything these 3 small humans experienced for the next 2 hours in the air. "Okay, buddies," he said, his voice steady in a way his heart wasn't. "We're going on a big adventure. Everyone walks together. Everyone stays close to Dad. You ready?" 3 heads nodded. 3 faces brightened. This was the part he was good at. The calm before. The preparation. The reassurance. He'd spent 17 years in construction before the triplets were born, and then 3 years learning how to build a life around 3 other people instead of buildings. Same principles applied. Solid foundation, careful planning, anticipate the problems before they arrive. He wore his anticipation like a tool belt. The morning had started at 4 a.m. He'd woken before the kids to triple-check the packing. Clothes for 3 days, but really for 6 days because kids spilled things and he couldn't afford the laundromat trip this month. Diapers. Pull-ups now mostly, but backup pull-ups because Noah still had accidents when he was anxious. Wipes, sunscreen, a change of clothes for each child in his personal carry-on just in case. Snacks he'd bought last week at the discount grocery store. Goldfish crackers in 3 separate containers, so no one could claim someone else got more. A tablet with 3 different movies downloaded because if the descent got rough, he needed backup plans to backup plans. He'd kissed each of them goodbye, kissed each one individually before they woke up fully, because his mother had specifically asked to see them and he'd built this trip on the back of a lie. He'd told her he was doing fine. He'd told her the kids were thriving. He hadn't told her that his truck needed repairs he couldn't afford, that Noah's ear infection had cost more than he expected, that he was $300 short on next month's rent, and was already calculating which bills could wait. He hadn't told her that some nights after he tucked the kids in, he sat in the kitchen with the lights off and tried to remember what it felt like to not be afraid. But he'd bought the tickets anyway. 3 tickets for $287 each on his credit card, because his mother had never met the triplets. Not once in 3 years. She'd chosen not to come to Portland when they were born. She'd chosen not to come to their first birthday, their second, or their third. And then last month she'd called and said she wanted to meet them. She said she was sorry. She said she was dying. Terminal diagnosis, 6 months to a year. And she wanted to know them before she couldn't anymore. Marcus had bought the tickets before he let himself think about how much they cost. Now he was walking through the jet bridge with 3 small children, trying not to calculate the weight of what he'd done, trying not to let that calculation show on his face. A flight attendant smiled at him, genuinely smiled, not the tight smile people usually gave when they saw a man alone with 3 kids who weren't old enough to be self-sufficient. He recognized her kindness and held on to it like proof that maybe this would be okay. The cabin was half full. They found their seats, 3 in a row for him and the twins, with Emma in a middle seat where he could see both her brothers. He settled them in with the meticulous care of someone who knew that the next 2 hours depended on keeping them comfortable and engaged. Liam got the window seat because he was the quietest when distracted. Noah got the aisle seat because he got restless and needed space. Emma, the oldest by 7 minutes, sat between them where Marcus could reach both twins if they needed him. "Window seat is special," he told Liam, buckling him in. "You get to see the clouds." Liam's eyes widened. Clouds? Real clouds. Really real. We're going to fly right into them. It was a small magic trick he'd learned. Reframe the thing they might be afraid of as the thing they should be excited about. Fear and excitement looked almost identical in a 3-year-old. All he had to do was label it differently. He buckled Noah next. "And you, buddy, you get the aisle seat because you're my tallest. I need you to be tall and strong so you can help me if anything feels scary. Can you do that?" Noah nodded seriously. He was still recovering from the ear infection, still a little clingy, still waking up at night sometimes crying from phantom pain. Marcus had learned that the best thing he could do for a scared child wasn't to promise them everything would be fine. It was to position them as capable of handling the fine themselves. Emma was already looking at the safety card. She was precocious that way, already interested in how things worked, what the instructions were, what the rules meant. She was going to be a problem solver like her father. That terrified him. "Emma," he said, sitting down in the middle seat where he could reach all three of them. "What does that card say?" She pointed at the oxygen mask diagram. "That one is for you. That one is for us. And which one do we do first?" "You," she said without hesitation. "You first. Then us." "That's right," he said, feeling something tight in his chest loosen just slightly. "That's exactly right. Because if I can't breathe, I can't help you. So I take care of myself first, and then I'm strong enough to take care of you." He wasn't sure if that was actually good parenting advice or if he was just telling himself things he needed to hear. The cabin filled. Families sat down. Couples settled in. People who traveled regularly. People who looked comfortable in airports. People who looked like they had people. Marcus had learned not to watch them too closely. That way lay the comparison he didn't have time for. Instead, he focused on his three. He focused on the immediate. He focused on the next 2 hours. The flight attendant did the safety demonstration. Marcus watched it carefully even though he'd watched it 100 times, because that's what responsible fathers did. They paid attention even to the repetitive parts. They modeled focus and seriousness. Then the plane began to taxi, and the children suddenly understood what was happening. They were actually leaving the ground. "We're really going?" Noah asked, looking at Marcus like this was the first time this reality had hit him. "We're really going," Marcus confirmed. "We're going to see your grandmother. Remember? We talked about this? What if I miss my room?" Emma asked. "Your room will be here when we get back," Marcus said. It was a lie, technically. Her room was a corner of a bedroom in a 2-bedroom apartment where 3 grown people lived, where he'd hung a string of lights and painted the walls soft yellow to make it feel like it was just hers. But the principle was true. Her life would still exist when she got back. He would still exist. He would still be here. The wheels left the ground. Marcus had flown maybe 10 times in his life. Most recently, 3 years ago, when the triplets were newborns and he'd been panic flying to meet his mother before the birth, hoping she might want to be part of this. She hadn't. She'd met him at the airport, held them for maybe 5 minutes each and told him she couldn't handle 3 babies at once, that she needed time to process, that she'd come visit when things were calmer. Things had never gotten calmer. She'd stopped calling. He'd stopped inviting. And then last month she'd called and said she was sorry, said she was dying, said she wanted to try again. Marcus wanted to believe her, wanted to believe in second chances, wanted to believe that you could fail at being present in someone's life and then get to come back and fix it. So he'd bought the tickets. So they were flying. The ascent was smooth. The children stayed calm. 20 minutes in and Marcus was already feeling the edge of relief. Maybe this would be okay. Maybe they'd sleep for part of it. Maybe he'd actually managed to pull off a family trip on the budget of a man who made $42,000 a year before taxes. "Dad, I'm thirsty," Liam said. "I'll get you water in just a moment, buddy. Let the plane finish going up first, okay?" He explained it like it was physics, like it was a fact of nature, like thirst could wait for the laws of aerodynamics. It sometimes worked. The children had learned to trust his explanations of how things worked. They'd learned that their father had systems and plans. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Marcus got up and went to find a flight attendant, who gave him 3 cups of water and 3 little pretzels in paper cups. He distributed them carefully. 3 cups, 3 pretzel portions. Everything equal, everything fair, everything exactly what each child needed. For a moment, in that moment of successful logistics, he felt like he was winning. He felt like maybe he could pull this off. Maybe he could be a single father and take 3 kids on a plane and visit his dying mother and come home and everything would somehow be okay. 40 minutes into the flight, things started to shift in a way he couldn't quite see coming. Liam had his face pressed against the window, watching the clouds and the landscape beneath them. Noah was playing with the touchscreen of the seat back in front of him, using his pudgy fingers to navigate the options with surprising competence. Emma was looking at the safety card again, asking questions about pressurization and altitude. And then Liam's head pulled back from the window. His breathing changed. Marcus recognized the shift instantly. It was the same sound Noah made when his ear hurt, the sound of a child's body preparing to cry, the throat tightening, the breath quickening, the moment right before the dam broke. "What's wrong, buddy?" Marcus asked, reaching over to put his hand on Liam's chest. "What happened?" "The plane," Liam said, and his voice was very small. "The plane is shaking." It wasn't shaking. There was some light turbulence, barely perceptible to an adult. But to a 3-year-old who'd never been on a plane before, who'd only ever felt the solid ground beneath his feet, Any movement of the air they were suspended in felt like falling. "That's just the wind," Marcus said, his voice the same calm tone he used for every scary thing. "The plane is made to handle the wind. The wind is actually keeping us up. The wind is helping us fly." "I don't like it," Liam said, and his lips started to quiver. Marcus could feel the moment happening before it fully arrived. He could sense the chemistry of fear, the way it worked through a 3-year-old's body like a virus. One child gets scared, and the other two absorb it through some mechanism that had nothing to do with logic and everything to do with the fact that they'd spent 3 years in the same room, the same apartment, the same precarious life. "Noah," Marcus said, keeping his voice level, "what do you see out your window? Can you tell me something cool?" It was a redirect. It was a distraction. It was the tool he had to fight with. Noah turned to look out the aisle window. He said, thinking hard. "I see a wing. There's a wing there." "That's right. That's the wing that helps us fly. That's the magic part. Can you point out the magic part to Liam?" But Liam was already crying. Not screaming yet, but crying. Quiet, serious crying. The kind that meant something had fundamentally shifted in his internal experience. And then Emma, sensing the distress from her brother, started crying too. Not from fear, but from empathy. From the biological reality that 3-year-olds raised together felt each other's emotions like they were still connected. And then Noah, looking at his brother and sister crying and sensing that something was very wrong but not knowing what, started crying too. All 3 of them, simultaneously. The kind of crying that fills a plane cabin like a siren. Marcus was not unprepared. He had strategies. He had the tablet, already loaded with their favorite movie. He had snacks. He had a small book about planes that he'd bought from the airport bookstore last week, spending money he didn't have because he was trying to prepare them for this moment. He pulled out the book. He pulled out the tablet. He tried to redirect, to comfort, to explain. He used every tool in his kit. Nothing worked. The crying continued. It escalated. It became the kind of crying where no logic matters, where no redirection lands, where a child is simply overwhelmed by their own emotion, and there is nothing to do but experience it. Marcus kept his voice steady. He kept his hands gentle. He kept telling them that everything was okay, that this was normal, that Daddy was right here. He did all the things that good fathers do when their children are falling apart, and around him, the cabin shifted. He could feel it more than he could see it. Heads turning, eyes landing on him. A flight attendant moving toward them with the particular expression that came when children were causing disruption. The woman across the aisle, 50s, traveling alone, perfectly composed, looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Judgment? Pity? Annoyance? One man, several rows up, actually turned around and stared. Actually stared, like the existence of 3 crying children was a personal offense to his travel experience. Marcus had felt this before. The invisible weight of being visible, the weight of taking up space, of having his private struggle become a public spectacle. A single father with 3 kids was always slightly suspicious in public spaces. It prompted questions. It prompted assumptions. It made people protective of their own comfort in ways they wouldn't be if it were a mother. A mother with 3 screaming kids was just having a rough moment. A father with 3 screaming kids was somehow failing in a more fundamental way. He kept his voice calm. He kept his hands steady, and he started to calculate escape routes that didn't exist. If he got up and walked to the back, people would think he was running away from his responsibility. If he stayed seated, he was disrupting the peace. There was no correct move. There was only the move that exposed him to the least amount of judgment, and he couldn't figure out what that was. Emma was still crying, but her crying had become quieter, more desperate, the kind of crying that came from emotional exhaustion, from the need to cry but not enough energy left to do it properly. Noah had moved from crying into that hiccuping state where his body was still processing the fear, even though his mind was starting to settle. And Liam. Liam was climbing into Marcus's lap, seeking the only refuge he understood, which was his father's presence. Marcus held all 3 of them as best he could. He felt his own hands shaking. He felt his own throat tightening. He felt the weight of 100 invisible judgments pressing down on him like pressure. This was the moment. This was the moment that would define this trip. This was the moment where he either stayed together or fell apart, and there was no privacy in which to fall apart. There was only this metal tube at 35,000 feet, filled with strangers, where his failure was on display for anyone who wanted to look. He closed his eyes and held his children and tried to remember that this was temporary, tried to remember that they would land, tried to remember that love and presence and doing your best was supposed to be enough, even when it felt like it wasn't. And then he felt something else, a presence beside him. Not a flight attendant with concern and professional distance, a person, someone sitting down in the empty seat next to Noah. Marcus opened his eyes. The woman from across the aisle was sitting down next to him. Mid-40s, dark hair, dark eyes that looked like they'd seen some version of what he was experiencing. She looked at him, not at the children, and she didn't say anything. She just sat there. "Hi," she said quietly. "I'm Sarah, and I'm gonna sit here for a little while if that's okay." Marcus couldn't speak. He couldn't move. He was looking at her the way a drowning man looks at a life raft, not with gratitude yet, but with confusion about whether this was really happening. "It's okay," she said, and her voice had something in it, something that wasn't pity, something that wasn't judgment, something that sounded like she understood the exact weight of what he was carrying. "I'm going to just sit here. You're not alone." And then she did something that seemed almost impossible. She looked at Noah, who was still hiccuping, and she started to talk to him, not to fix him, not to make him stop crying, just to acknowledge his experience. "That turbulence scared you, didn't it?" she said. "That's a really normal thing to feel scared about. You know what scared me when I was little? Everything about planes. The noise, the shaking, all of it." Noah looked at her with wet eyes, listening. "But I flew a lot," she continued. "And you know what I learned? The plane is actually super safe. The people who fly planes, they fly them like 5 times a day. They know how to handle anything that happens. So we're okay. We're really okay." She wasn't trying to make him happy. She wasn't trying to make him stop crying. She was just bearing witness to his fear and offering him the information that might help. It was so simple. It was so fundamentally different from every other interaction Marcus had witnessed in his life, where an adult tried to fix a child's emotion instead of respecting it. Liam was starting to look at her too. His crying had softened into the kind of quiet that suggested he was listening. "The thing about being 3, Sarah said, addressing all 3 of them now, but particularly Liam, is that your body feels everything really intensely. Everything is new and big and important. But that's actually a superpower, you know? When you're 3, you notice things, you feel things, you experience things that older people miss." She wasn't a flight attendant. She wasn't a professional anything as far as Marcus could tell. She was just a woman who decided to sit down next to a man with 3 falling apart children and offer him her presence. Marcus felt something in his chest break open. Emma had stopped crying now. She was watching Sarah with the careful attention of a child who sensed that this woman understood something. "Are you a mom?" she asked. "I am," Sarah said. "I have a son. He's 6 now. But when he was 3, there was this one day. We were in the grocery store and he was completely overwhelmed, just breaking down because they didn't have his favorite cereal. And we were the only 2 people in the cereal aisle, and I had to sit down on the floor because I didn't know what else to do." "Did someone help you?" Emma asked. "You know what? Someone did. A woman came over and she sat with us for like 5 minutes. She didn't fix anything. She didn't even really say much, but she was there. And I remember thinking, in that moment, that I wasn't alone, that what I was experiencing, struggling with a 3-year-old, wasn't shameful. It wasn't a failure. It was just part of being a human who cares about another human." Marcus wasn't sure when he started crying. It might have been somewhere in the middle of that story. It might have been when Sarah sat down. It might have been weeks ago, and this was just the moment where it finally became visible. He kept his hand on Liam's back. He kept his eyes forward, but the tears came anyway, quietly, because he was a man, and men didn't cry in public, even though in that moment, sitting next to a stranger who'd decided to carry part of his weight, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. The turbulence continued. The plane kept shaking slightly, but Sarah kept talking, not about the turbulence but about other things. She asked the children their names. She asked them what they liked. She told them about her son, about the time he was scared of butterflies, about the time he learned to read and it changed his entire relationship to the world. She wasn't trying to make the moment perfect. She was just making it bearable. She was making it bearable by being present, by acknowledging that yes, this was hard, and yes, they were managing it anyway, and yes, that was enough. After what felt like both a moment and an eternity, the turbulence passed. The children's breathing steadied. Emma eventually asked Sarah if she wanted to look at the safety card with her. Sarah said she absolutely did. Liam eventually fell asleep on Marcus's shoulder, his small hand gripping his father's arm. Noah started playing with the tablet again, but quietly, peacefully, like his nervous system had finally believed that the plane was safe and his father was okay, and therefore everything was going to be fine. And Sarah just stayed. She didn't make conversation. She didn't try to prove her presence was necessary. She just sat in the seat next to them and read the magazine from the pocket of the seat in front of her, occasionally glancing over to make sure everyone was still breathing okay. Time moved differently after that. The crisis had passed, but it hadn't passed because the children stopped crying. It had passed because someone had witnessed it. Someone had said, "I see that you're struggling, and I don't think you're failing. I see that you're doing everything right and it's still hard, and I'm going to sit with you while it's hard." An hour into the flight, Emma fell asleep too. Just like that. As if her body had finally gotten permission to rest now that an adult other than her father had validated that everything was okay. Noah was still awake, but quiet, contained, peaceful in a way he hadn't been since they'd boarded. "Thank you," Marcus said. It felt like the smallest possible response to what Sarah had done. "You don't have to thank me," Sarah said. She was still looking at the magazine, not at him. "I've been exactly where you are. Maybe not on a plane, but I know that feeling. That feeling of being the only adult in the room. That feeling of every decision mattering so much. That feeling of being completely visible and completely invisible at the same time." "How long?" Marcus asked. "He's 6 now, so about 6 years of solo parenting, give or take. Though the first 3 years of the triplets, it feels longer, doesn't it?" He didn't remember telling her they were triplets. Maybe it was obvious. 3 children the exact same age, 1 father, 1 set of hands. 4 years for me with the triplets, he said. "Though it feels like 4 decades. "It does," she agreed. "It really does. But you're doing it. You're on a plane with 3 kids. You're going somewhere. You're showing them that the world is big and weird and sometimes scary, but it's also worth experiencing. Do you know how brave that is?" Marcus didn't feel brave. He felt like he was barely holding it together. He felt like if Sarah hadn't sat down next to him, he might have had a complete breakdown somewhere over the continental United States. "I feel like I'm failing most of the time," he said. It was the kind of thing you weren't supposed to admit to a stranger. It was the kind of thing you only admitted in the quiet dark of your own home, when all the kids were asleep and you were sitting alone with your own inadequacy. "You're not failing," Sarah said. She turned and looked at him then, really looked at him. "You know what failing would be? Not showing up, not caring, not holding your son when he's scared. You're doing the exact opposite of failing. You're not failing. You're just human." They talked for the rest of the descent. Not about their struggles particularly, but about small things. About the fact that Noah's ear infection must have been terrifying because ear pain in children was terrible. About the fact that Emma's interest in how things worked was probably going to make her brilliant someday. About the fact that Liam's sensitivity to his environment was actually an asset, not a liability, once he got older, and could channel it into something useful. She told him she was flying to Portland too, returning from a conference trying to get back to her life before everything got too overwhelming. He told her he was flying to meet his mother, which was complicated because his mother hadn't been there, and now she was dying, and he was trying to figure out if forgiveness was something you could do at the last minute, or if it had to be earned over time. "That's hard," Sarah said, and she meant it. She wasn't trying to fix it or tell him what to do. She was just acknowledging the weight of it. The descent was smooth. The children slept through it. The plane touched down in Portland, and for a moment, before the seatbelt sign dinged off, Sarah and Marcus just sat in the companionable silence of 2 people who'd just gone through something together. "I know this is going to sound presumptuous," Sarah said, pulling out her phone, "but I'd like your number. Not because I'm trying to... I have a kid, and you have 3, and neither of us probably have time for anything other than survival. But because I want you to know that if you need to talk to someone who gets it, someone who understands what it's like to be a single parent with everything on the line, I'm available. And also because what you did today, showing your kids that it's okay to be scared and safe at the same time, that was beautiful parenting." Marcus gave her his number. He asked for hers. He felt like he was moving through a dream, because this kind of thing didn't happen in real life. This kind of grace didn't just sit down next to you and offer to carry part of your weight. Or maybe it did. Maybe it happened all the time and he'd just never noticed because he was too busy trying to solve everything alone. They parted ways in the airport. Sarah to her car. Marcus to the arrival area where his mother was supposedly waiting. He held the 3 sleeping children as he pushed through the gate, pulling the luggage, feeling both completely exhausted and somehow lighter than he'd been in years. His mother was waiting, just like she'd said. She looked older than he remembered, sicker. Her cancer was already ravaging her body, and she'd only just called a month ago to say she wanted to meet her grandchildren. He let her hold each child as they woke up. He watched her face transform as she looked at them, and he found himself not angry anymore, not resentful about the years she'd missed, just present, just there, just willing to try. That night, after the children were asleep in the guest room of his mother's small Portland house, after he'd put them to bed and tucked them in and whispered to them that everything was going to be okay, he texted Sarah. He wrote, "They're asleep. They're asking about you. Emma wants to know if you can visit us sometime." Sarah responded immediately, "Tell Emma I'm honored. And tell yourself something. Today you taught your children that strong people ask for help when they need it, and that kind people show up for people they don't know. That's a master class in character." Marcus read that text 17 times. He lay in his mother's guest room, on an air mattress in a hallway, listening to his children breathe in the darkness, and he let himself believe that maybe he wasn't failing. Maybe he was actually doing something right. Maybe grace wasn't something that arrived when you solved everything perfectly. Maybe grace arrived when you stopped trying to solve it alone. The next morning, he called Sarah. Not texted, called. He wanted to hear her voice. "Hi," she said, and she sounded surprised and pleased. "Hi," he said. "I wanted to thank you again. I know I already said thank you, but I don't think I said it in a way that captured everything." "Marcus," she said, and the way she said his name made him feel like he'd done something worth being known for. "You don't have to thank me, but I do want to tell you something. I sat with you on that plane, not because I was helping you. I sat with you because I needed to be reminded that people like us exist. People like us? People who love their kids enough to be terrified. People who'd sacrifice anything to show their children the world. People who are completely overwhelmed but keep going anyway. I was sitting on that plane thinking about how hard my life is, and I watched you with your 3 children, and I thought, there's a man who's carrying twice what I'm carrying and he's still showing up. And it reminded me that we're not alone, that there's a whole community of people doing this impossible thing, and we're all just trying to keep our children safe and loved and whole." Marcus felt something shift in his understanding. He'd thought he was the one being helped. He'd thought Sarah was the strong one, swooping in to save him. But what if they were both just recognizing something in each other? What if grace wasn't rescue? What if it was recognition? "Can I tell you something?" Marcus asked. "Of course. I've been terrified for 3 years that I'm not enough, that I'm not enough father for 3 kids, that I'm not enough of anything. And you sat down next to me and I felt, for the first time since they were born, like maybe I actually was enough. Like maybe the fact that I cared so much, tried so hard, stayed present even when it was breaking me, like maybe that was actually the point. Like maybe that was what being a good father looked like." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "It is," she said. "That's exactly what it looks like. And I want you to remember that. When you're tired, when you're scared, when you feel invisible and like nobody sees what you're doing. I see it. The people in your community see it. Your children definitely see it." They talked for an hour. Sarah had to go to work. Marcus had to take the children to meet their grandmother. But before he hung up, Sarah said something that changed everything. "I want to give you my address," she said. "Or actually, I want to suggest something. There's a single-parent meetup group that meets in Portland once a month. Different city each month, but Portland is next month. And I'm going to be there, and I think you should bring your kids and come. Just to meet other people who get it. Just to be around people who understand what you're doing." "I don't know if I can make it," Marcus said. "We're flying back tomorrow, and Portland is far from where I live." "I know," Sarah said. "But next month maybe? Just a thought. Just in case you decide that carrying this alone isn't the only option." When he hung up the phone, Marcus sat for a long time in the darkness of the guest room. His mother was asleep down the hall. His children were asleep in the bedroom across from him. And he was alone, but not the kind of alone he'd felt before. The kind of alone that felt like a temporary state. The kind of alone that felt like it was about to change. He thought about that plane ride. He thought about the moment when Sarah sat down next to him. He thought about how his entire experience of that moment had shifted when someone else acknowledged that yes, it was hard, and yes, he was doing it anyway, and yes, that was enough. He thought about grace. About how grace wasn't rescue. How grace was recognition. How Grace was one person seeing another person and saying, I know how hard this is, and I'm going to sit with you while you're experiencing it. The next 2 days with his mother were complicated. She cried when she held the children. She told Marcus she was sorry for missing so much. She asked if he could forgive her, and Marcus, having just experienced the grace of being seen by a stranger, found that he could say yes. Not because what she'd done was okay, not because the years of absence were forgiven, but because forgiveness wasn't about erasing the past. It was about making room for the present. On the way to the airport, his mother asked him, Are you okay? Are you going to be okay when you get back home? Marcus thought about Sarah. He thought about the way she'd seen him. He thought about the fact that he'd spent 3 years believing he had to be okay alone, that asking for help was failure, that being a single father meant doing it all by himself. Yeah, he said, I'm going to be okay. And you know what? I think I'm going to be better than okay. The flight home was peaceful. The children slept most of the way. And Marcus, sitting in his seat with 3 sleeping children around him, realized something that changed everything about how he understood his own story. He'd thought the hard part was being visible. He'd thought the hard part was being judged. He'd thought the hard part was carrying everything alone in a way that made it look effortless. But the hard part, he realized now, was allowing himself to be seen, really seen. Not as a success, but as a human being trying to do something impossible and doing it anyway. And the grace, the real grace, wasn't that someone helped him. The grace was that someone looked at him and said, I see you, and I don't think you're failing, and you're not alone. That's what changed everything. A month later, Marcus drove his 3 children to Portland for the single-parent meetup. It was a Saturday, and they made an adventure of it, and they met Sarah and her son. And then they met 12 other single parents, each carrying their own version of the weight, each trying to figure out how to be enough. And in that room full of people who understood exactly what he was experiencing, Marcus finally felt like he could breathe. Like maybe, just maybe, he'd been strong all along. Like maybe strength wasn't about doing it alone. Like maybe strength was knowing when to let someone sit with you in the hard moments. Like maybe that had been the real magic all along. Are you a single dad watching this? Tell me your story in the comments. Where are you watching from? What kept you going today? 1 year later, something unexpected happened. Marcus was promoted at his construction company. Not just a raise, but actual management. Because his supervisor had noticed something about the way he treated people, the way he saw people, the way he could manage difficult situations without making anyone feel less than. You have a way of making people feel seen, his supervisor said in the meeting where he offered the promotion. That's rare. That's valuable. That's what leaders need. Marcus hadn't realized that being seen by one person, Sarah on an airplane, would eventually make it possible for him to see other people, that the grace he'd received would eventually become the grace he could offer to others. He thought about telling his supervisor that it all started on a plane with 3 crying children and a woman who understood what it meant to be invisible, that it started with someone choosing to sit with him instead of looking away. He accepted the promotion. The money was better, which meant less stress, which meant he could actually breathe sometimes. He cut his hours slightly, which meant more time with the triplets, which meant he could be present in a way that had previously felt impossible. And every month, without fail, he drove to Portland to the single-parent meetup, and every month, he watched Sarah doing the same thing she'd done for him, sitting with people, seeing them, making them feel less alone. One day, after one of those meetings, Sarah pulled him aside. I have something to tell you, she said, and I want you to know that I'm not saying this to put pressure on you or to assume anything, but I've been thinking about how much I appreciate knowing you, how much I appreciate that you let me be part of your journey, and I want to know if you'd ever be interested in being part of mine. What do you mean? Marcus asked, though he thought he already knew. I mean, I'm really tired of doing this alone, she said, and I look at you with your 3 kids, and I don't see a burden. I see someone who loves so completely that it's actually inspiring, and I was wondering if maybe, somewhere down the road, you might want to combine our families. Not immediately, not even soon, but eventually, someone to share this with, someone who gets it. Marcus felt his entire life reorganize itself in that moment. He thought about the woman on the airplane. He thought about how grace had arrived without warning, without invitation, without him understanding that he needed it. And now grace was arriving again in a different form but carrying the same message. You're not alone. Yeah, he said. Eventually. I'd like that. Yeah? Sarah asked, and she sounded surprised. Yeah, he confirmed. I've spent a lot of time thinking about what happened on that plane, about how one person choosing to see me changed everything. And I think maybe it's time to stop being grateful for that grace and start understanding that I deserve it, that we deserve it, that single parents, we deserve love too. We deserve partnership. We deserve to not do this alone. Sarah reached for his hand. It was a small gesture, but it carried the weight of everything they'd both been carrying separately. I was so scared to say that, she admitted. I was so scared you'd think I was overstepping or that I was trying to fix something that wasn't broken. You're not fixing anything, Marcus said. You're just acknowledging that sometimes grace compounds, that sometimes one act of kindness opens the door for more kindness, that sometimes letting someone see you leads to letting someone love you. They didn't rush anything. That wasn't what either of them needed. They took it slow. They let their children get to know each other. They built something that looked less like a rescue story and more like two people who'd learned to see each other, choosing to keep seeing each other. And on the night they decided to move in together, not immediately but soon, giving everyone time to adjust, Marcus sat with Sarah on her porch and told her something he'd never told anyone. That first plane ride, he said, when you sat down next to me, I thought you were saving me. I thought that's what that moment was, someone rescuing a drowning man. And what do you think now? Sarah asked. I think we were both drowning, he said. I think we both needed to know we weren't alone. And I think what actually happened on that plane wasn't that you saved me. I think what happened was that we saved each other. You saw my struggle and it reminded you that you weren't failing either. And I saw your willingness to help, and it reminded me that grace was real. We didn't rescue each other. We recognized each other. Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder. That's beautiful, she said. And also I think we both need to stop using water metaphors because we're on a porch and you're making me paranoid. He laughed. It was the kind of laugh that came from deep in his chest, the kind that had been missing for a long time, the kind that only arrived when you felt like maybe, just maybe, you'd finally found something worth believing in. 2 years after that plane ride, Marcus married Sarah on a beach in California, surrounded by 3 children of his, 1 child of hers, and a community of single parents who'd become their chosen family. His mother was there, in a wheelchair by that point, but there witnessing her son get married. The woman next to him, her hair braided with flowers, her eyes bright with the kind of love that comes from being truly seen, looked at him and mouthed, I'm so proud of you. And Marcus, looking at her, realized that the entire trajectory of his life had shifted that day on the plane, not because someone rescued him, but because someone looked at him and said, I see you. You're not alone. And from that moment forward, he never was. Later, when people would ask him how he managed to find love as a single parent with 3 kids, he'd tell them the story. He'd tell them about the plane. He'd tell them about Sarah sitting down next to him. He'd tell them that grace doesn't arrive as rescue. Grace arrives as recognition. Have you ever done something good only to be misunderstood? Tell me about it in the comments. How did it feel when someone finally saw what you were really trying to do? And gradually over time, Marcus became known in his community, not just as a good father, but as someone who could see people, who could sit with someone in their struggle without trying to fix it, who understood that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was simply acknowledge that yes, this is hard, and yes, you're doing it anyway, and yes, you're not alone. He brought that skill into his work. He brought it into his marriage. He brought it into his extended family, which now included Sarah's parents, his mother's siblings, a whole network of people who'd learned from him that grace recognizes grace. And every time he got on a plane with his family, now the merged family, now 6 of them instead of 4, now a full unit that looked like the American story was supposed to look, he thought about that first flight, about the moment when everything changed, about the woman who saw him and decided to stay. 5 years later, Marcus started a nonprofit. It was a simple idea: connect single parents, create community, help people realize that they weren't alone, that what they were doing, raising children alone, trying to create stability and love out of impossible circumstances, was heroic, and that heroes deserve to know they're not alone. The first meeting had 12 people. By the second year, it had grown to 100. By the 5th year, Marcus had started chapters in 5 different states, and at every single meeting, he told the story about the plane, about Sarah, about the moment that changed everything, because he wanted every single parent in that room to understand something essential. You're not invisible. Someone sees you. You might not know it yet, but someone is watching and understanding and thinking, That person is doing something extraordinary. One day a man approached him after a meeting. He was young, maybe late 20s, and he had 3 kids with him, all around the same age. Triplets. "I just want to thank you," the man said. "I was at the end. I was completely done. I didn't think I could do this anymore. And then I came to one of your meetings and heard your story, and I realized that what I was experiencing, the loneliness, the invisibility, the feeling that nobody understood, I realized that I wasn't the only one." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "And I wanted you to know," the man continued, "that knowing I'm not alone, that saved my life. That made me believe I could do this. That changed everything." Marcus put his hand on the man's shoulder. He knew exactly what that felt like. He knew exactly what it meant to be at the end, and then to have someone see you and say, "You're not at the end. You're in the middle of something beautiful. Keep going," Marcus said, "and when you get through this, and you will, find someone else at the end and let them know they're not alone. That's how we all survive. That's how grace multiplies." The man nodded. He had tears in his eyes. And Marcus, standing in his community center, surrounded by single parents who were changing their own lives and their children's lives just by showing up, realized something that had taken him 8 years to fully understand. That day on the plane, Sarah didn't save him. She recognized him, and that recognition gave him permission to recognize himself. And once he could see himself, really see himself, not as a failure, but as a person doing something extraordinary, everything changed. Not because he fixed his life, but because he finally understood that his life didn't need fixing. His life needed witnessing. His struggle needed recognition. His existence as a father, as a provider, as someone who loved completely and without reservation, needed to be seen by someone else so that he could finally see it himself. Grace doesn't rescue drowning people. Grace recognizes strong people who are in difficult circumstances and says, "I see you." And that recognition is often more powerful than rescue ever could be. What's the most invisible thing you've sacrificed for someone you love? Tell me in the comments. I want to know what you're carrying that nobody sees. 10 years after that plane ride, Marcus was invited to speak at a parenting conference. The organizers had heard about his work with single parents. They wanted him to talk about resilience, about community, about how to survive the impossible. But Marcus knew what he actually wanted to talk about. He wanted to talk about grace. He stood in front of 2,000 people and told the story of the plane. He described the moment when all 3 children were crying, when he felt completely exposed, when he believed he was failing. And he described the moment when Sarah sat down next to him. "I've spent 10 years thinking about that moment," he said, "and I've realized something important. Grace isn't what we think it is. We think grace is rescue. We think grace is someone swooping in and fixing what's broken. But that's not what happened on that plane. Sarah didn't rescue me. She recognized me. She looked at me, a man who was completely overwhelmed, and she didn't see a failure. She saw a good father, in a hard moment doing the right thing anyway." He paused, looking out at the audience. "And I think that's what every single parent needs," he continued. "Not rescue, recognition, not someone to fix our lives. Someone to look at us and say, 'I see what you're doing, I see how hard you're trying, I see the love you're carrying, and I want you to know that it matters. It's enough. You're enough.'" The room was silent, and then someone started clapping, and then everyone was clapping. And Marcus stood there thinking about how far he'd come, about how one moment of recognition had changed the entire trajectory of his life, because that's what grace does. It doesn't fix anything. It witnesses. It acknowledges, it says, "You're not alone." And sometimes that's all we need to believe, that we're going to be okay. After the speech, people lined up to talk to him. Single mothers, single fathers, people at the end of their rope, people trying to figure out how to hold it together. And Marcus listened to every single story. And at the end of every conversation, he said the same thing. "You're not failing. Someone sees you. You just have to be willing to let them." That night, Marcus flew home to his family. Sarah was waiting with all 4 children, the 3 that had been his, the one that had been hers. They'd added one more, a child they'd adopted together, a child who'd been through the foster system and needed a family willing to see her. Marcus held his wife. He looked at his children, each of them bearing evidence of his love, each of them a testament to the fact that he'd done something right. And he thought about that plane ride, about the moment that changed everything, and he understood finally what it had all been about. It wasn't about rescue. It wasn't about being fixed. It was about being seen. It was about one person looking at another and saying, I know how hard this is, and I'm not going to pretend I don't see the weight you're carrying. I'm just going to sit with you while you carry it. That was grace. That was real. That was everything. Know a single dad with a turnaround story? Send it to us. Include his city and what changed everything for him. Let's amplify these stories. And somewhere, on a plane, a father with 3 crying children was experiencing his own moment. And somewhere, a stranger was deciding whether or not to look away. And Marcus, having lived through that moment, could only hope that they would choose to look, that they would choose to see, that they would choose to sit down and say, "You're not alone." Because that's how grace multiplies. That's how we all survive. That's how we change each other's lives without even realizing we're doing it, by choosing to see.